we're really honoured to have Michael Kaufman here because he's a fantastic public speaker, an educator, a writer and consultant. He wrote this seminal book about A Guy's Guide to Feminism, but he also has written an award-winning novel, The Possibility of Dreaming on a Night Without Stars. He's worked with numerous NGOs, including Oxfam, International Red Cross, Save the Children, Amnesty International, and he's the co-founder of the White Ribbon Campaign, which is the largest effort in the world of men working to end violence against women. He's going to talk for about 25, 30 minutes, and then he's going to be joined on stage by Hannah Poole, who is down there. She's a journalist and commentator and author, and she writes regularly for The Guardian, for national and international media. She was the associate editor of Arise magazine, which is a global African fashion and lifestyle magazine, and her work appears regularly in Times, Grazia, and others. And she's the curator of the talks and debates here at South Bank Centre for Africa Utopia, and works with me and other colleagues on the Women of the World Festival. And her book, My Father's Daughter, A Story of Family and Belonging, was described by the Washington Post as a significant and moving book. So Michael's going to take the floor first of all. Hannah's then going to join him for a bit. There might be one or two questions. Can I welcome from the stage Michael Kaufman? Thank you.
So listen, Michael, we live in a world where men still have power, where every day we read in the papers another story about violence against women, abuse, FGM. We know that women do, 80, 90% of the agricultural work in the world, and yet they control 1% of the world's resources. And you say we don't need feminism? Oh my. Listen, I've heard this for so many years. This is just, I've had enough. Look yeah, there used to be a problem, I'll grant you that, but the tables have turned now. There was a time when we needed feminism, I'll grant you that. But the tables have turned, and now it's men who are the oppressed species. You know, go into a university, go into a professional school, women, 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 affirmative action programs all over the place, women, women, women. You've got to, things have gone too far. The pendulum has swung, the fulcrum has shifted, other metaphors, and it's just gone too far. Well, anyway, you and I have heard this discussion over and over and over again. Are we living in a post-feminist era? There's books out like Hannah Rosen's The End of Men. Camille Paglia did a column interview about a couple weeks ago, saying there's no real men left. So we're hearing these things. And so it confronts us as men to think about these issues, of not just of men and masculinity and men's experiences, as we've been talking about during the day, but men in relationship to the most powerful movement of social change that really has ever happened in human history. When you think about it, structures, social relations, ideals of what it means not just to be women and men, but what it means to be human, ideas of God, ideas that go back about 8,000 years. Many of these have not only been challenged, but in some cases have been swept away in the course of 1 or 2 generations. It's the most remarkable change. And it is critical that we men here at BAM, and women here too, think about this issue of men in relationship to feminism. Now, let me just start with this question of, that some of us in doing this work, any of us doing this work, are still confronted with by those who say, like my esteemed colleague over here, that, yes, maybe we needed it in the past, things have gone too far, the pendulum has shifted, all that sort of stuff. What do we know right now about the continuing problem, the continuing existence of inequality? Well, I think that it would be foolish, and just hope this is going to work. We have a red light. Is this good? By the way, while I'm figuring this out, Happy Chinese New Year to everyone. Gong hei fa choi. Okay, so we still live in a world where men still make about in most of the global north, £1.50, £1.40 for every pound that women make. We still live in a world where men dominate most levels of politics. This is my favorite men dominating politics picture. This is the North Korean, I don't know what they're called, parliament or whatever they are. A lot of men. Men are social leaders, political leaders, religious leaders by far. And if you ever want to spot a male leader in the crowd, just watch for the man waving. That's how you know you've got a male leader. Men, of course, well, yeah, I mean, the ultimate guy in the sky. We still have these images within most of our religious traditions, certainly the Western Judeo-Christian Islamic traditions, of God as, really virtually a male figure. History of male-dominated societies is one of training groups of men to be warriors, to be soldiers. And it's not only true in the ancient past, but very much to this day, as we see with these US soldiers. A male-dominated society is one in which men still control the economies of the world. And let me say, what a great job my half of the species is doing on that one, folks. A male-dominated society, which we still have, is one in which our biggest football heroes and stars are men, the best paid, the ones that get the most attention, even if at times they fall from grace. A male-dominated society is one in which our supervisors and bosses still are disproportionately men. And of course, men are always supposed to be in charge and leading the way. Now, we have made extraordinary progress. Sometimes when I talk to my women friends, feminist activists, scholars, often the focus is on just the horrors that remain. And one of the things that I just feel so strongly about is the incredible impact that my sisters have had, that the women's movements around the world have had, this dramatic transformation. And so whatever challenges lie ahead, let us recognize and thank the women, including many of the women in this room, who have been the pioneers for the form of social justice that we codify as gender equality. The result, though, of this continued male domination is that world where violence against women is still pandemic and women are being paid less, women don't have the same opportunities, and there are places in the world where women don't get maternal care because their husband doesn't give them permission to go to a hospital or clinic. We could go on and on and on, but those realities remain. I believe, and as a man, I believe that our world still needs feminism. It still needs women independently organizing. We need women's voices, and we as men need to be listening to those voices because we're going to learn and continue to learn a lot from those voices. So why should men support feminism? Well, part of the reason is what I've already been saying. I believe we should support feminism because it's right, because it is a movement of human liberation. Some of you, probably a decreasing number around me, but some of you, like me, will remember the original term that was used at the beginning of the second wave feminism in the late 60s. Women's groups weren't talking about gender equality. The word feminism was only used here and there, but the big word that was used, the phrase that was used, does anyone remember? Women's liberation. Feminism is a movement of liberation. And the reason why all of us, as those of us in this room as men, and certainly I trust and hope the women in this room as women, support feminism, is because it is the most basic and profound movement of human liberation. And that in itself makes it worth supporting. Now, when men support it, we do it out of love for the women in our lives. We do it out of a belief in equality, in justice. But some think that means, well, are we talking about some sort of collective guilt, collective blame? We point the finger at you. Too bad you're a man, you oppressive pig, you. This is not what it's about, though. That's not what it's, well, I mean, he is, but I mean, everyone else is okay. But that's not what it's about. This isn't about collective guilt. This is not about collective blame. When men support feminism, it is about collective love for the women in our lives. But I think there's another reason. In addition, that would be enough. That would be reason enough for men to support feminism, all that I've been saying. But there is another reason why we as men should support feminism. Because I believe, and I know a number of the men in this room believe, that this is also the best thing that ever happened to men and for men. Think about it. Imagine that you're a reporter. We've got some journalists here. Can I see your hands? Okay, so as a journalist, I know you do this all the time. You do man-on-the-street interviews. You probably never have, but anyway. So just pretending you're doing a man-on-the-street interview, and we all know about the existence of these inequalities within a male-dominated society, of men's power. So we're going to go out there, just cross the bridge, go down to the Strand, and we're going to go up to men and say, "Excuse me, sir, tell me all about your power." And that man is going to look at you like you're crazy. So he didn't work, so we're going to go to another man, maybe another part of town, and say, "Excuse me, sir, tell me all about your power." And he'll look at you like you're So what will happen over and over again is we'll get these signs of disbelief among men that they have power. Now, part of that is because the nature of power and privilege. When you have power and privilege based on your sex, based on the color of your skin, based on your sexual orientation, your social class, part of having power and privilege is it's invisible to you. So those men that we've just asked actually don't see the privileges they enjoy as men. But if we ask, as I do when I speak on a university campus, I'll say, which of you women here has ever thought twice about going to the library at night because you're worried about walking home alone? Which of you women here has ever told someone who you're going on a date with, what time to make sure that you're back? Every woman in the room will stand up or raise their hand. And then we'll ask the men, how many of you have those worries? And of course, few, if any, men will. We see that, but that privilege that men enjoy is invisible. So one of the reasons those men will say, "Power? Me? I don't have power," is that the power is invisible. But there's another reason why they'll say we don't have power. And that gets us to the heart of issues around men and masculinity, and the other big reason why men should support feminism. I want to tell you a story, and a few of you in this room who've heard me speak before have heard me tell the story because it is the best thing that ever happened to me. It was when my son was born. It was the most wonderful moment of my life. Some of you know I have a daughter too, so you might think I'm a horrible sexist creep for saying, but my daughter's a stepdaughter, and for some reason the parents didn't invite me to the birth. I don't know why they didn't, but anyway. So there we were in the delivery room, and my son had been, this was 32 years ago, ages ago. So my son had been born about, 5 seconds, and I didn't yet know if it was a boy or a girl. It's not because we Canadians are stupid. I do know the difference between boys and girls, but I didn't know if it was a boy or a girl because I had so many tears in my eyes. I couldn't see the little thing, and I mean the little thing on the little thing. I didn't know if it was a boy or a girl until the nurse spoke. Now, until the second, the nurse had been speaking in her normal voice, and then suddenly her voice dropped down really deep, and she said, "It's a boy. What a strong little fellow." And I was totally shocked. Not because it was a boy, I kind of figured there was a 50-50 chance of that, but I was shocked by the change in her voice and what she said. And I knew if it had been a girl, her voice would have gone up a notch, and she would have said, "She's so sweet," that sort of thing. My kid was 5 seconds old, and he was being measured for his first football jersey. And what we know from studies around the world is that girls are systematically held differently, talked to differently, given different toys, given different possibilities, given different names, given different colors, and on and on and on. We're bombarded with these images of what it means to be a man. And this goes on and on. The toys and costumes that we buy boys, representing power, strength, domination, control. The video games that boys would play, become these sort of robotic images of manhood. Of course, then we graduate into being Calvin Klein models, which is the other job that brought me to London this week for a photo shoot, because as you can tell, I am, anyway, and we're, just these endless images of men as powerful, tough, in control, no feelings, and of course, dominating women. And by the way, remember all that stuff about 20 years ago about subliminal advertisement? Remember that stuff? There ain't anything subliminal about that. Oh, yes. You didn't notice. Anyway, so these images of men, not just as powerful in ourselves, but controlling women. So we're bombarded with these images. And it's not just that we're bombarded with them on the outside. What we now know is that the process of learning is actually absorbing these images, these ideals, into our developing brain. So our brains at birth, our neocortex, our upper brain functioning, is like 10% there. And every single day as a newborn, we create millions of new neural linkages, neurons. We're absorbing the world at a frantic pace. And one of the things we absorb is gender. So our ideas of masculinity and femininity are not just ideas that float around in society in our head. We literally come to embody them. We bring these right into our brain. So you would think that being bombarded with these images of masculinity from birth would be enough to make men feel really solid about being real men. But the incredible thing, that among men all over the world, this bombardment of these images is not enough to really solidify a sense that I am a real man. And so the other thing that we do, we raise boys and men to be real men using humiliation. And not just, a scene from the army, but from the start. So the little boy who falls down and cries, we say to him, don't be a girl, don't be a sissy, be a man, big boys don't cry. We raise our sons with humiliation to fit into this little box of manhood. We teach our sons systematically not to trust their feelings. When that little boy falls down and cries, we also say to him, don't cry, it didn't really hurt. Well, yes, it did. That's why he's crying. But from the start, and I've seen parents not only, tease and taunt a boy, but literally hit a boy for expressing feelings, for showing weakness, as it were. This humiliation isn't new. The other night, I saw this remarkable production of Richard II, which I hadn't seen before, in spite of being incredibly well, classically educated, but I hadn't seen it. And there's this one line where Richard, the king, who's now being deposed, I can't even talk, but he's about to be disposed, but he's just being deposed at this point. Anyway, so Richard has been, is in the process of being kicked out. One of his flunkies is trying to humor him so he doesn't feel as bad about, losing his kingship. And so his flunky is making fun of the usurpers to the throne. And he refers to them as boys with women's voices who strive to speak big. So this idea of humiliating boys and men who are not real men. And of course the form of humiliation is you're like a woman, you're like a girl. So the humiliation of men is saying you're not just not a man, but you are what our society collectively hates, which has been all those things that have come to be assumed is about femininity. So men carry this dialogue of self-doubt about living up to these possibilities. This has gone on, as I say, for a long time, but right now it's getting worse because we are supersizing masculinity. What do I mean by that? Well, when I was a kid, these were my superheroes in the 1950s and 60s. Yes, they are flabby middle-aged guys. I know I'm looking more like a superhero all the time. But I want to tell you, in all seriousness, these guys were my images of invincible masculinity. I could only fantasize about being that powerful, that tough. I couldn't pull it off. I could never be that manly. Well, here's what a boy's got to live up to today. And not only the impossible muscles, but look at the difference between this sort of noble and goofy expression to this, I'm going to kill you, you motherfucker expression. This is what boys have to live up to today. Or here's another one. This is an American boy toy, not boy toy, but an action figure for boys, G.I. Joe, their soldier toy, the original one, and here's G.I. Joe now. If you can't quite see it at the back, there's a pectoral close-up. Or here's the original Luke Skywalker action figure from Star Wars, and here's Luke Skywalker now. So you can see this incredible, supersizing of manhood. So if the men in this group, in this room, had a hard time living up to our images of manhood, just think what a boy has to do now. And then you graduate to these sort of men's health porn. And of course, in a way, these guys don't exist. I mean, they exist. These are real men. But who knows what they had to do to look that way? You know, is it, I mean, they are working out all the time, perhaps, you know, on special diets, perhaps drugs, who knows, perhaps surgery. But even then, these pictures are photoshopped. And so we get manipulated to think this is what a real man looks like. Now, in honor of my visit here to London, I actually got a hold of the original of the picture on the left before he was photoshopped. Do you want to see what it looks like? This is absolutely incredible. This is before being photoshopped. And anyway, I love that picture. Anyway, so what do we do with this? Well, first of all, we see the result. And I want to show you a picture, and after showing funny pictures, this picture is not funny, and so anyway, this is the result of this process. This is a group of US soldiers in Iraq, so several years ago. And it's a picture they took of themselves in their barracks. Now, just think of this. These are men who are at literally the peak of physical conditioning. What they go through to become soldiers, you know, puts the, you know, workout queens and kings here to shame. They're in incredible shape. They've been given a license to kill. They're allowed to kill people. They have ultimate power over life and death. So you would think, in the world of men, this would be a self-confident group of men. What do you see in the picture? Well, what I see is men posing. You know, this guy with his knife, this guy with his firearm, even though he's inside, this guy with that "don't screw with me" expression, this guy looking very sexy, this guy who's stuck a cigarette in his mouth even though he can't smoke it inside, this guy just sort of clued out. And there's only one of them who just looks like, gee, I get to be in a picture with my buddies. But these are men posing as, quote, real men. The other thing you might notice, which some colleagues in Ireland pointed out when I showed them this picture, because they work with some veterans, is that look at their eyes. They said these are eyes of people, they call them dead eyes, men or women who've been in war and are asked to do things which no human being should ever do. So where does this lead us? Where does this lead us in terms of men and feminism? Well, I think it leads us clearly to two things. It says, yes, as men, we should be supporting feminism because of the women whom we love. Because it is the movement of world transformation that is significantly improving the lives of women and girls. That's reason enough. But we should also support it because, as I said before, this is the best thing that's ever happened to men. Because what men's lives are a paradox. Men have what I've termed a contradictory experience or experiences of power. Yes, we can say overall men have power, but within a male-dominated society, men's experiences of that power is very differentiated, is very complex. So our relationship to power depends on our socioeconomic class, depends on our sexual orientation, depends on the color of our skin, depends on our physical abilities, it depends on how we speak, what accent we speak with in the country we're living in, and on, our religion. And so some of the things that a few people in this room have explored over the year, including Vic Seidler, who's here, have looked at the impact on men of a male-dominated society. We see it's a paradoxical impact, giving my half of the population, forms of privilege and power, and yet demanding a price for it. And that price is on different levels, but one of the levels is just demanding we distance ourselves from a whole range of human possibilities, human emotions. We demand of ourselves traditionally that we've distanced ourselves from children. Luckily, as we talked about in the panel this morning, that is being reversed. So I believe, and I know, and we're looking around the world, there are incredible efforts now in the global north and the global south to engage men and boys in promoting gender equality and ending violence against women. We're seeing just diverse and exciting things all over the globe of groups intervening in the complex world of men and boys. Efforts like the White Ribbon Campaign, which I've been involved in, I'll be talking about that a bit tomorrow afternoon, that is mobilizing men's voices to speak out against violence against women all over the world. It's an exciting process to see that. Efforts like the new Men Care that has, as I said this morning, the modest goal of men doing 50% of the care work on the planet. And we're hearing just exciting stories from our partners in Sri Lanka and Rwanda and South Africa and Brazil and Sweden and all over the place. So it's happening out there. And it's happening by the men who are, you could say, are not the usual suspects. I recently was at a men care meeting, and I met this man from the Ukraine, and he runs what they call Papa's schools, and it's this whole network of groups to basically train men in parenting skills. Men who've never held a baby before. They're called Papa schools. So, they've got like 1,000 trained volunteers now running these schools. It's quite incredible. So I asked him, so is this your job? Is this your work? He goes, no. And I said, no. Oh, he says, it's just volunteer work. And I said, well, what do you do for a living? And he said, I sell tractor. And I say, you sell tractors? He goes, of course. As if most men's activists promoting gender equality sell tractors for a living. But it really shows us something. That we can't just assume, it's a certain type of men who are engaging with feminism. What we're seeing is that the impact of feminism has been so wide and so broad that we see literally now hundreds of thousands, perhaps millions of men around the world who are actively engaged in efforts to challenge gender inequality, to challenge the oppression of women, and to transform the lives of men. And that's a really exciting thing. And sorry, I was going to show you some fatherhood pictures as I was talking. But anyway, these are some pictures I showed this morning of men doing that caregiving work. So where does this leave us? I know we're going to have a bit of a conversation right now, but I just want to, leave you with one image, which is, the old real men can be, in favor of feminism. So thank you.
Thank you very much, Michael. As someone who, I was brought up predominantly by my father, in fact, my book is actually called My Father's Daughter with a kind of weird grammatical apostrophe after the S because I have two fathers and no mother. And so I spent a lot of time thinking about the influence of men and women and our relationship. So it's really interesting to kind of watch you. My dad was a single parent in the kind of 80s, which was before it kind of became cool. So I think about these issues a lot. And as a passionate feminist, I think about these issues and campaign on these issues a lot. And it's actually really nice to hear you use humour because I feel so often in this conversation, there's a lot of hostility. Whether you're a campaigning feminist, whether you're campaigning on men's rights, often the conversation gets locked into this place of hostility, which, as you say, is to do with power. So firstly, I guess, I think language is important and it came up earlier on. You talk a lot about supporting feminism. Do you define yourself as a feminist?
I'm pretty old school on that one. I don't, because my understanding, and this, as I say, this is maybe old school, but my understanding is that feminism is not only a philosophy of gender equality, of ending gender oppression, but also an expression of women's experiences of oppression and change. And so as a man, my feeling has always been, I can certainly, and I am, explicitly pro-feminist, but that part of feminism, which is about women's experience, obviously, I can listen and learn, but that's it. When I talk to younger men, they often just say, stop being a pedantic ass, and just, this is where the dividing line is, and just say it. So I try not to get caught up in that. Mm-hmm. I don't, just given being on the outside watching the emergence of second wave feminism, it just seems it made sense to think of myself as a pro-feminist. Mm-hmm.
So as an ally rather than
as an ally,
right.
As a fellow traveler,
right.
as a colleague.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Okay, and so you said that we get caught up in this idea, and you talked also about the contradictions of men and all the power that men have, and at what cost. Do you think it's contradictory then to be a man and to be a feminist ally?
No, I don't at all. I mean, it's, I think that any man who is not is missing the boat. And as I was saying, because I really do think it's so profoundly, it's for any man who loves women, it's a no-brainer. And for any man who loves men, I think it's a no-brainer. So I just think that it's, I just wish that conversation was over. We can just say, okay, let's just move on with creating this world of equality, but not just equality, because equality is not good enough when you think about it. It was this arch sexist, I think it was Norman Mailer back in the 60s, who wasn't exactly a lover of feminism. But I think, someone please correct me, but I think he was the one who quipped, oh, women wanting equality with men, well, they're setting their sights a bit low. And that's why I do love that old language of liberation, which unfortunately we've tended to lose.
Mm-hmm. But do you think, I mean, the conversation has been going on for an incredibly long time. Is that because men are fundamentally not willing to give up the power?
Yeah. I mean, I think there's two things. I think it goes to those two sides of that paradox which I was talking about. I think men are scared of giving up power. Some, consciously scared of it. They know they're about to compete with the other half of humanity for jobs. They're going to, they would experience or assume that, oh, suddenly they have to do half of the housework and childcare rather than pursuing their career, going out with their friends at night, relaxing. That just feels like a burden. Mm-hmm. So, or they've just, philosophized it. There's an ideology around it that just, the assumption is this is just the natural order of things, mm-hmm. so it's not even conceivable. But I think for many men, there's also just plain fear. There's an assumption among men that the social norm, that what we believe as men, that we should be in charge, that we should be dominant. And part of what we do, those of us in this room who've been active in engaging men and boys, is that we try to set up safe environments, like this conference, mm-hmm. safe environments where men can say to each other, that those ideals of manhood, that just really isn't me. Mm-hmm. It doesn't fit who I am, what I want to be. Yes, I'm in favor of equality. Yes, I'm struggling to do my share of the child care and domestic work. And as soon as we begin to interrupt that assumption of what it means to be a man, men are almost like lining up. Mm-hmm. I really believe, some of us feel like, I hear people say, oh, this is just too hard to engage men. I have not been in a country in the world, I've worked, I don't know, in about 45 countries now, and I've never been in any country, in any community, where people haven't said to me when I've met with them, well, I know it works in your country, mm-hmm. or in your city, but here's the difference. Everyone says that. And yet, as soon as we create new possibilities for men, the whole world opens up for those men. I really believe that men have waited their whole life to hear this message. Often when I speak, like in not like a groovy meeting like this, but in a community or school or something where men have, or young men have been dragged to it, there's all some guys who come in and they sit like this. They lean, they lean back as far away from me as possible, and they sort of scowl because they think that I'm just going to crap on them for the next hour. Mm-hmm. Instead, I tell stories about the impossibility of living up to these demands of manhood, and those guys are my barometers. I watch them first. They lean forward, and then they lean forward a bit more, and then they drop their arms, and then very, subtly, so their buddy doesn't notice, they start nodding, because what's happening at that moment is they're hearing. It's like holding up a mirror. They're hearing another man talk about what they've always known, but thought they were the only man on the planet who felt he couldn't live up to those expectations.
And within those conversations, do you have conversations with feminists who might think that actually you should be focusing your energies less on men and more on the trials of women?
Yeah, no, there is. It's not easy work. I think there have been legitimate concerns mm-hmm. by women's activists and organizations that if we put efforts, even if just as men, or if our institutions or if UN agencies put resources into engaging men, programs for boys, is it going to take resources away from women's groups? Mm. Or are men going to walk in and take over? Mm. That's okay, dear, we'll look after things now.
Yeah. We'll sort out feminism for you,
yes,
don't worry.
That's right, that's right. And I think those are really important concerns that men need to listen to. One of the first things that we say to men is listening to the voices of women, learn from that. But on the money stuff and funding stuff, which has been a bit of a source of contention, one of the things that always people will say, you're trying to, you're going to take a bigger slice of the pie, and we're going to get a smaller slice. And one of the things that we say is, let's bake a bigger pie. And after all, it's men who control governments and budgets and religious institutions. And if we engage those men to understand that these issues are critical issues for them, there's going to be more money for these issues. If we can engage in prevention work to end men's violence against women, it's going to have a huge impact on the bottom line, the budgets of women's refuges and services. So yes, there has been, it's been a process over the past few decades that I've been working in this area, trying to find common cause, common space, common language with women's organizations and figuring out ways to work together. It feels to me that in the last few years there's been a lot of change with many women's organizations basically saying to men, it's about time you started speaking out. And that's a positive change.
Okay, great. I'm conscious of time, so I think I'm going to open it up now to the floor. We do have a roving mic, so if you could just wait until the mic gets to you, that'd be fabulous. Thank you. Yes, so we have a question over here. I'll take 3 in one go just to speed things up. So, yes.
Oh,
just.
Sorry. Well, thanks so much, Michael. I was really interested in what you were saying about the conversations you've had with men. You've worked in like 45 different countries. One thing I was wondering, because it's something that feminism has had to deal with, for example, Western feminism being accused of trying to speak for all women when, say, women of color and others saying, you don't represent me. And have you found that there are different issues facing men in different parts of the world, like different forms of masculinity, or do you think it is quite homogenous? That'd be really interesting to hear your thoughts on that.
Yeah, I just want to go on record that I am speaking on behalf of mankind. I should have said that at the beginning. One of the things that has been really exciting is both seeing the commonalities. A number of years ago when I developed some of my writings, when they first were getting translated, I thought this probably is not going to work in Nepalese. And yes, the specifics were different, but the underlying thing, this men having power, but also constructing these ephemeral and illusory identities around this pursuit of power, that resonated in different ways. I'm a middle-class white Jewish man, so some of the ways I, within my experience, learned to appropriate the world of men's power had to do with words and language. Speaking. Here I am, folks. My working class brother is going to do it through tools and through manipulating objects. Another one is going to use it, learned, and it could be that same middle class Jewish urban man or the other brother, but using violence. So the particular ways that men appropriate and internalize the world of men's power is definitely culturally bound. But there are common elements. And so it is so exciting working internationally to see that sense of what we have in common, but also the differences.
Okay, so there's over there, and then another one in this block. And then we'll go to that block.
Hi. You highlighted how men often feel as though we've focused on women particularly and not men. So do you think, or what extent do you think we'd have to go to finally come to an equal society where men are treated, it's not just either woman or either men, it can be both at the same time?
It's really interesting because, I do want to say that even though I'm an advocate of working to engage men and boys, I'm not saying that women's groups should pack up shop or that you should be now, women's groups should be turning your sights to men and boys. It's really, I think ultimately it has to be the responsibility of men to do that work, to reach out to our brothers. And there was a point this morning in the panel on fatherhood, and it was a lovely exchange between one of the other panelists and someone, I think she's still here, but said, do you think we're going to get to the point of full equality in the home? And then she said, with men doing 50% of the care work, as I was ranting about. And Owen on the panel said, well, 50-50, for me that's what equality is. And it's so simple. And I do think that is our future. Now, it doesn't mean, as some people, fearmongers say, we won't have males and females anymore, because the species kind of come that way. And if we're heterosexual, that's an absolutely wonderful, delightful difference. But probably a delightful difference for everyone in different ways, I guess, or whatever. But the thing is, it does mean challenging gender, not challenging the existence of biological difference, but challenging all of our assumptions about what it means to be a man and a woman, or a woman, our ideals of masculinity and femininity, the power relations between the sexes, all that around gender. As the rock singer Patti Smith said years ago, any gender is a drag. And I really agree with her, because that part of what the women's movement has challenged is very narrow, constricting ideas of what it means to be women. And I think I think that it behooves men to also think about that in relation to men. And one of the places that straight men can really learn about that is working in Congress with our gay and bisexual brothers and transgendered brothers who have been at the forefront, on the front lines, to use a male, or not male, but masculine military image, being at the front lines of work to challenge sort of limiting notions of what it means to be a man.
Okay, and there was another one in this block, yes, and then we'll go to this block, and then over here.
Yeah, I'm still trying to construct this question, but we live in a modern world, where we're all, the economics of capitalism requires there be rich and poor, a difference to be profitable. So if I want to make profit, I need that. So in this conversation of men and women being equal, the modern society doesn't encourage that, because it doesn't encourage profitability. Does that make sense? Mm. And I'm just wondering, how are you then going to combat this, to come to the solution of equality, when in reality corporations don't really want equality, they want profit?
Is
it corporations or institutions?
I think it's both. I mean, the thing about a system, that's what a system means. It just percolates through everything from how you imagine the world, to corporations, to institutions, to political systems, to the state. The thing about the oppression of women, it really was the original form of social domination. Before we had much in the way of socioeconomic class, it's permeated increasingly all societies over the past 8,000 years. Slave societies, feudal societies, sort of state socialism, or whatever we want to call the former USSR and China, capitalist societies. So the oppression of women has been a constant, so not just within capitalism. But I think you raise a critical point, which it's fine to talk about gender equality. But as we heard this morning, talking about fatherhood, you can't talk about, we just need policies of father's leave and that's going to transform fatherhood. What about the man who is working by the hour, who couldn't possibly take off time? So we have to talk about, have that broader social, for me, I think we have to have that broader social agenda, talking about social inequality and equality, and talking about that broader social transformation. So I think I really do appreciate you've raised that point. Thank you.
Okay, we're just going to go to this block first.
Vic Seidler. I just want to raise two concerns. Today has been an absolutely remarkable day for the number of different kinds of voices we've heard in the different sessions. And we've heard young men from very diverse racial, ethnic backgrounds talk about the struggles they have in affirming both their masculinities, but also their capacity to love, to give of themselves, and to feel that their love will be responded to. But not in any one of those sessions was the concern of feminism raised. So I'm wondering whether men's relationship to the feminism, which was the question I was brought up with, as Michael was, as a number of men of a particular generation in this room, that was our question, because we started raising issues about our own assumptions about our own masculinities because of the questions that were phrased by feminism. But in the 3 sessions we've had today, that has not been the question. So I'm wondering whether the universalism, which was part of the hope, reflects the way that feminism at a certain stage talked about women in general, talked about differences, but basically said what's more significant is what we share in common. And feminism had to go through that moment of saying, no, differences are more significant, they're harder. We don't know how to think about them. And I'm wondering now, when generations have shifted, new technologies just shape young experience in a radically different way from our generation, whether we need to think in different ways to challenge the idea that men's rights, or a kind of anti-feminism, has actually become very strong, particularly in a kind of collective gathering in Brighton just kind of 2 years ago. So men are coming together around almost an explicitly anti-feminist position because they think that's the only way that as men they can speak and be heard. Jude,
okay, I'm going to have to just bring you to a question.
Yeah, absolutely. Jude Kelly brought this question this morning, saying, the danger is that we make our sons, the next generation, feel guilty about their perpetuating sexism. And there was a danger that we did do that. But the question is, how do we frame a conversation across very different generations of men?
Okay,
and what are the terms in which that's going to take place?
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Dick.
Did you want to start?
No,
saying,
I mean, he just made a great point.
Okay,
so.
fabulous. Okay, so I think we're going to go for equality. We're going to go for this block, who haven't spoken yet. Thank you.
Hello, my question's a bit shorter. That's a bit rude. I wanted to ask, I work in advertising, are there any good examples of pro-feminist men or pro-feminist masculinity in advertising or pop culture?
Great question. Can anybody think of any? If you can't. Beckham is always thrown up as a pro-feminist man or some kind of...
Sorry?
David Beckham is often thrown up as a kind of male icon who does both fatherhood and masculinity at the same time. But it's kind of confusing.
Yeah, I don't know.
Anybody?
Anyone?
I think that's probably an answer. Oh, no, yes? Sorry? Barry? Oh. Sillet Bang Man, okay. I think we've got time for one more question, and then I'm going to have to ask you for some kind of closing thoughts.
Hello. You mentioned that one of the biggest humiliation towards men is questioning their masculinity and calling them being not manly enough or girly. But on the other side of that, in the past 15 years, we've seen a development where being girly has been celebrated, especially in the US. Well, examples would be One Direction or Justin Bieber.
Canada.
Don't start dissing One Direction, no good will come of it.
But I was wondering, how can you explain this phenomenon? And do you think that it will continue to progress into that direction? No pun intended.
Interesting. You know, I think that one of the things that, even though I was saying that one of the challenges for men is to, within the community of men and within any society, is to create greater space to celebrate the diversity among men, celebrate our sexual diversities, celebrate just different expressions of what it means to be a man. But you know, I think that there has been there's some very contradictory images of manhood out there, and it seems to be a society in flux. You know, if you look at older movies, there tends to be much more uniform images of masculinity and of femininity, and so it's in play, as it were. And I think when we see, you know, particular movies or characters or you know, a singer, you know, someone, you know, even think back, you know, someone like Mick Jagger, who, you know, could spew out, you know, vilely sexist lyrics, but also have a certain androgyny around him, which was part of his appeal. So, you know, I think it's a sign of cultures in flux, where we have those different images of masculinity. But interesting. I think all these, like the question at the back about these sort of changes within popular culture are really fascinating. I can end with a story?
Yes, please do.
Okay, let me end with a story about the possibility of change. And it's a story I told last year at WOW, but it's definitely a WOW story. I mean, it really talks about the capacity of men to change and to embrace change. This morning in the fatherhood panel, one of the people here was Idin Malala's father, and from the Swat region of Pakistan, which most of us, many of us anyway, hadn't heard of until the last few years. Described as a remote tribal region of Pakistan, seen a fundamentalist organizing. I'd met a fellow from the Swat region a number of years ago now. I hadn't heard of it, and I met this guy, and he told me his story. He said he'd gone off to law school, and while he was at law school, there was a coup d'etat, and the general who came to power, in order to, do you mind if I just stand up?
No.
Just because there's people in the back who can't see. So while he was at law school, there was a coup d'etat, the general came to power. And this general, to curry favor with the fundamentalist types, proclaimed a number of new laws, including one called the Hudud Ordinances. Now, some of you have heard of this because one of the most infamous parts of the Hudud Ordinances was if a woman was raped, to prove that, she had to come up with 4 male witnesses who would testify on her behalf. And if she couldn't, she would then be charged with adultery and could be just thrown for years into prison or even executed. And of course, no woman could come up with 4 male witnesses who would testify on her behalf. So this guy comes back from law school to his community in the Swat region, and he sees this happening. He sees these women being thrown into prison or even executed who had been sexually assaulted. And he says 2 things. He says, first of all, he says, this is not what I've been learning as the Pakistani legal tradition. This is wrong. But he also said, as a Muslim, this isn't what my religion teaches, he said. So he started defending these women, and he won. He got them off these charges of adultery. Well, the powers that be, to wreak their revenge, trumped up some charges and threw him into prison. Now, we've had a panel just now on prisons and the awfulness and horror of prisons in Britain. Well, if prisons are that bad in the United Kingdom, imagine what a prison would be like in the remote Swat region of Pakistan. We're talking about a total hellhole they threw him into. And then imagine for a second, if you will, what happened to this man? What happened to him in prison when the other male prisoners found out why he was in prison? Think what happened to him. And whatever you just imagined, you're probably wrong. Because when the other male prisoners found out that he was in prison for defending the women in their community, they all went on a hunger strike. They said, we are not going to eat until you release our brother from this prison. And they won. Now, if that can happen in the remote Swat region of Pakistan, think what we can do here. Think what we can do right here in England. Think what I can do in Canada. Think what we can do in all the world. I believe that men have waited their whole life to hear a message that they don't have to cling ferociously to these narrow and limiting and constricting and impossible to achieve definitions of manhood. I think men have waited their whole life to embrace the possibility that they can actually have nurturing, loving relations with their children. And I actually think more and more men are welcoming the chance to have women in their lives who are their true partners and who are true partners in the world. We don't have to go to the remote Swat region of Pakistan to see this. We can see this around us every single day. Every single day. I talked to this one student who said that he and his friends at university had a tradition. Whenever it was one of their birthdays, they all went to the local strip club. And this guy said, I just didn't feel comfortable, but for 4 years at university, I went along with it. And the end of my 4th year was coming, he said. I knew there was one more birthday, and I made a decision, he said. There was a knock on his door one night. All his friends were there, and they said, John, let's go. And John didn't have to go to prison to change them. John didn't have to risk his life to change these friends of his. All John needed was one word, and not even a big word. It was a word that had 2 letters. John just said no. Well, the friends looked at him and said, John, what's the matter? Are you sick? He said, no. They said, John, do you have a test tomorrow? He said, no. And then, the homophobia came out. John, you haven't switched teams on us, have you? He said, no. Well, why don't you want to go? And he said, I just don't like going there. It just feels wrong. Well, John's friends looked at him. The first one said, what do you mean? You don't like going there? Like, whenever I go there, I always feel dirty afterwards, like I got to take a shower or something. And the next guy says, hey, wait a minute, you guys don't like going? Whenever I go to that strip club, my girlfriend don't speak to me for like a week after. And the next guy said, well, I don't really like going because it offends my religion. And the next one said, yeah, I like seeing women without their clothes on, but it just feels wrong. You're paying for it. Just, I read this article about trafficking, and it just, anyway, they went around this group that devotedly for 4 years had been going to this strip club. And all it took was one man saying one word with 2 letters, no. And they stopped. And that's what brings us together, really, for BAM. It's talking about how we, as men, can be part of the greatest revolution in human history. How we can embrace feminism out of love for the women in our lives, but also out of love for the men in our lives, for our sons and our daughters, and for ourselves. And when we do, as we do, the more we do, the more we find ways to work together as women and men, the more we create a better world for women, but also a better world for men. And most importantly, a far, far better world for our children and our grandchildren. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Thank you.